As you can tell by the title of the video, today we're going to be going over my entire training history. I'm going to be giving you guys a lot of detail on how I got started in lifting, what I did when I started, what I did during each phase, what worked, what didn't, what I've learned, the mistakes I've made, and how I ended up where I am today with the physical results and kind of the mental results, as in my lifting philosophies, the methods that I use, and the methods that I suggest to you guys. And I think if you guys have an understanding of how I learned everything that I did, it will just give you guys a little bit more of an appreciation and I guess kind of solidify the information that I'm giving to you guys on this channel. So yeah, with that being said, if you kind of understand how I learned what I did and why I learned what I did, I think it will help you guys a little bit. So I know I've got a ton of loyal subscribers already, which is just awesome. I guess I don't really care too much about like how many of you there are, but the people that watch this channel, we get a ton of comments. Like it's awesome. You guys are the best. I love hearing everything from like the guys that are in their 60s that talk about how awesome their training's been a few times a week and losing weight, to the younger teenager guys that are like just getting into lifting and thanking me for kind of taking them off the wrong path when it comes to muscle building, and to everybody in between. I absolutely love seeing those comments. It's so much fun to talk to all of you guys. And yeah, this is just kind of giving back and teaching you a little bit about how I learned what I learned and how I got to where I got. So with that being said, before I get too far into the video, I do want to just let you guys know I have been doing a little bit of online coaching. I've had actually quite a few of you guys reach out to me for it, so I did want to promote that a little bit more and let you guys know I do have a kind of a side business of online coaching if you guys are interested. I know I haven't promoted it very much at all on this channel, but I made it as affordable as possible. It's just something that I absolutely love to do as more of a hobby than a business, if that makes sense. If you guys feel like you need kind of that extra push when it comes to a little bit more of individualized programming and accountability, I have some awesome systems that I think you guys would really like. If you like my videos, I would love to train you, and I think we'd have a great time and make awesome results for you. So yeah, with that being said, my email is going to be in the description, in the comments. It's also on the bio of this. It's yt.basementbodybuilding@gmail.com. Feel free to reach out if it's something you're interested in. I'd be more than happy to set up like a 15 or 30 minute FaceTime or Zoom call with you guys and just go over what your goals are, what mistakes you've made, and show you what the plan we can potentially do to get you to where you want to be is, give you a timeline and actually some practical advice. So yeah, with that being said, I'd love to train you guys. It's been such a fun community, so it's definitely a hobby of mine. Please reach out if it's something that you think you might want or something that you think you might need. So with that being said, let's get into the video today. So when I first started lifting, it was strength and conditioning. And I was an athlete in high school, basically an athlete up until I finished up high school. But I was lucky to have some really good trainers for strength and conditioning. So I really learned the foundations of not hypertrophy training, but overall lifting in general, a little bit of strength training, lots of body weight stuff, lots of explosive and hit style movements. Definitely a very well thought out and structured program. I really gained a lot of overall conditioning, general physical preparedness work, and a really good base of strength from doing some of this training for a little bit. I was about 16-ish at the time, maybe 17. I think I started at like 15 or 16, did it till I was 16 or 17. It was about a year or so of pretty consistent strength and conditioning, 2, maybe 3 times a week. Really did build a solid foundation. So this was okay. It wasn't necessarily what I wanted to do. Like I didn't actually enjoy it because I wasn't training to build muscle, which is what I always wanted to do. But it gave me a pretty solid foundation, kind of an insight into how to actually work hard and what actual hard work was. So I think that's the advantage that athletes have over the general population that has never really participated in sports or training with your team before, is the physical work capacity and the kind of the pain tolerance of being able to take stuff to failure and really understand the physical work that it takes. So you see a lot of people that will like work a desk job and be fine and like they'll crush it on the mental side, but the physical side's lacking. Their overall conditioning endurance just isn't there. So that is 100% the advantage that athletes have over people that have never really participated in sports. So I did start with a little bit of an advantage, 100%. So I got my first real gym membership when I was 18. So I could go into my own, just a regular commercial type gym, had all the equipment that I needed or whatever. Started that. Oh, you know what? I might have been 17. Yeah, I was 17 actually. I hadn't quite turned 18 yet. It was right before it was the summer before my senior year of high school. And I trained for about 4 months just purely for hypertrophy. I just kind of did a little bit of instinctive stuff. I actually followed some of those like kind of roided up bodybuilders' advice on how to actually get bigger. And some of it's good, some of it's bad, but I actually got really good results off of it. And I think I got better results doing that than I would have just doing strength work, because when I was doing my strength and conditioning, I didn't really gain a whole ton of muscle, and we were still doing like squat variations, deadlift variations, little bit of bench variations. And I really didn't gain much muscle. And that program was kind of along the lines of like the starting strength types with obviously a lot more conditioning and explosiveness work. So I kind of instinctively at that point had learned to avoid powerlifting programs and really avoid like the 5x5, 5-3-1 starting strength type programs. And I think it was for the best. And I made a ton of muscular gains really quick. And I've never really edited a video on here before, but I'm going to try and put up some of these pictures. Like the muscle that I gained was absolutely insane how fast I gained it. I had never seen anybody else like at my school, especially doing it naturally, gain that much muscle that quick. And I think it was because instead of like doing these weird kind of full body 5x5 type beginner programs that aren't actually designed for hypertrophy, I think it's because I trained with an incredibly high frequency and high volume and like had that background of that sport and that strength and conditioning to give me the coordination and kind of mental edge that I had. That set me up for success, and I gained a lot of muscle really quickly. It really did not take me very long, and I understand not everybody's going to be in that exact perfect position that I was in, but I learned a lot from that, and that's ultimately what brought me back to the way that I train now, and I learned a ton from it, even though I was just a beginner. The knowledge that I got from that and the experience that I got from training like that wasn't necessarily applicable or wasn't necessarily something I was really aware of until very recently, because you have to kind of reflect, and we all know hindsight's 20/20. So that's how I've learned a lot of what I have learned today. So to detail a little bit of what I was actually doing back then, I kind of skipped a lot of muscle groups. I was kind of like a chest and arm bro. I did some shoulders, some back. I skipped legs. I was literally just doing like a push-pull split. It started off on just chest and arms, actually. I do chest one day, arms the next, chest one day, arms the next, maybe a shoulder day here or there. But the kind of mental fortitude that I trained with allowed me to build up a really good foundation of some arm gains and some chest gains. And once I discovered like you should be training your back and your legs a little bit, you can kind of apply the same thing. And I built a lot of really high quality muscle from doing that. So eventually the program I went into was just push. So I do chest, shoulders, tris, and then I do back and bis. And there was phases where I kind of did legs, back and bis. I definitely skipped it a lot. I was, 17 or 18 at the time. So I got 4 months of high quality work, and I was doing a lot of dumbbell bench, pec deck, cable flies, preacher curls, spider curls, dumbbell curls, hammer curls, tricep push downs, tons of overhead extensions, tons of side raises, a little bit of overhead press, lots of rear delt flies, reverse pec deck. I was doing a lot of neutral grip pull-ups, lat pull-downs, machine rows, little bit of like leg extensions. I squatted like very briefly for a couple weeks. I actually had a really good foundation for squats because of the sport that I played and the strength and conditioning that I had done before. So it was like really easy for me to hop into decent weight. And I also had, I believe every person has a specific genetic strength, and mine is definitely strength, like the overall power output. Like powerlifting comes very naturally to me. I think it's probably my muscle fiber makeup, and obviously that's pretty genetic, but that's what comes naturally to me. The higher reps and the endurance, that's always been a struggle of mine. So I think the overall strength numbers, they were pretty easy for me to attain. Building muscle was a little bit tougher, so I do understand that. But yeah, I mean, overall, I built a really good foundation. I actually had a really good physique in only a couple months. Like I can put pictures up here to kind of prove it to you guys if I actually figure out how to edit videos. I just have to find the right app where I can kind of do it from my phone. So I did this for a little bit, about 4 months, took 2 or 3 months off for sports season. After that, got back into the gym, regained all that lost muscle very, very quickly, and then some. Kept training that way for about a year later. So this is when I was 18, trained like that until I was about 19, doing more of that like hypertrophy bodybuilding style, and was slowly progressing, making decent progress. Like, you could definitely tell I lifted. Lots of people would say that the physique I had at that point was pretty impressive. So at age 19, that's when I started to fall a little bit more into that kind of like power builder phase. And this is where my training started to go off the rails a little bit. So when you're 19, you are basically, the way I see it is you're like a child again, because when you're 18, you are like the wisest of the kids. You're the senior in high school. You know everything of what it's like to be a teenager, to be a kid. Like, you're the smartest in your domain. When you're 19, you're basically a child again, because you're the youngest of the adults. So your world transforms entirely. That's something you kind of learn with age. So when that happens, you're pretty independent. You become you become very, I can't think of the right word, but very, like, susceptible to other people. Like, you're very easy to influence, and you're very, I can't even think of the right way to say it. I'm completely stumbling on my words, but basically you're easily influenced. So I started following a little bit more like lifters and whatnot on social media, on Instagram, YouTube, and whatnot. And that led me down the wrong path entirely. We basically went from such a strong foundation when I was 17 or 18 of just doing what I felt was right and doing what I knew was right based on my lifting, to saying, okay, well, these guys who were on steroids at the time were telling me to increase my strength numbers to get bigger, which was just not the best advice, because they didn't actually tell you that, well, you can't just power lift and use that as a shortcut. They weren't saying what to do. They were just saying, oh, if you get to this, this will happen, which my buddy Carell from Stand Strength completely debunks. He's a philosophy major, so he debunked that entirely. So check out his channel if you need some help with that kind of stuff. And I started going into these heavier lifts, and I started doing the big three. I did squat, bench, and deadlift. At one point, I started to realize that building muscle actually helps you get stronger, and not necessarily the other way around, but I couldn't articulate it in my brain because I was so easily influenced. Just to give you guys a little bit of an insight onto what was going on, I built so much muscle on like my arms and my back and whatnot that I just straight up pulled a 405 conventional deadlift with terrible form after never touching a barbell deadlift in my life whatsoever. I was 18 at the time and just pulled it right off the ground. And that was because I had a ton of muscle, not because I trained for strength. So I'm not saying building a bunch of muscle is the best way to get stronger, but that's a tangent, getting off point here. So I ended up falling a little bit more into the powerlifting, power building type of training. And the problem with this is I was already strong enough to the point where I was lifting pretty heavy weight on the big three, to where it really started to impact my recovery and started to impact a lot of my isolation and hypertrophy focused lifts. So as someone that didn't know a whole ton about programming and always had that more is better approach, like I could with more hypertrophy focused lifts, I was destroying my overall fatigue. I was fatigued all the time. Had to start taking pre-workout, which I'll probably talk about that in another video. And I needed that pre-workout. I needed caffeine to do every workout. I was doing compound lifts every day because I had that more is better approach. But I was training them like a noob, and I was already so strong that it was really impacting like my lower back and my fatigue and my recovery from session to session, from set to set, from lift to lift, week to week and whatnot. And I kept milking this out because I just kept telling myself, oh, if I reach 400 squat, 400 bench, or 500, 600 deadlift, that I'll actually have the muscle that I want to have. But in reality, I already kind of had the muscle that I would have gotten from the big three lifts just from doing other lifts. And I kept milking these out. And the stronger I got, the muscle gains were very, very slow because I kept building up strength. And you have to have such specific programming with that, as time went on, I basically couldn't sustain the volume, the intensity, and the effort on every other lift. So my training slowly went from entirely for hypertrophy into, okay, let me introduce the big three because this guy said if I keep getting stronger and get a 315 bench, I'll have a bigger chest, to saying, okay, well, now I can't do my flies because I'm so tired from my 315 bench, or from my bench training for the 315. And that's a problem because now my volume isn't correct, my intensity isn't correct, proximity to failure isn't right. Like every variable is just completely destroyed. So as I got stronger and as my numbers went up on the big three, that came at the expense of the foundations of hypertrophy training in the first place. And you probably are starting to understand where my lifting philosophy comes from now. So I kept going and kept going and kept going. And eventually, in 2019, so I would have been 20 at the time, I ended up maxing out in that September. So this is like after a year and a half of just pure powerlifting training. I went on a pretty significant cut for whatever reason, and I got down to like 10% body fat. I'll probably throw a picture up of that spring, but I kind of bounced back, started eating a little bit more and training a little bit more in a powerlifting way, maxed out in September of that year. So this is about 16, 18 months after starting to introduce some of those barbell lifts into my training. And I wasn't much bigger. Like, yeah, you could tell I had gained some muscle, but not in the areas that the big three were training. And this is where I'm starting to kind of realize a little bit more, but I couldn't quite articulate it because I was still young and impressionable and couldn't really think for myself yet when it comes to actual training. So what I ended up doing was September 2019, over the course of 2 to 3 weeks, I maxed out on the squat, bench, deadlift. I hit a 455 squat, I hit a 330 paused bench, and I hit a 605 deadlift. And those numbers are awesome. But then nothing really came of it. Like I was big and I had an awesome physique, 100%, but it wasn't as good as it should have been based on the numbers I was hitting. And that was the fallacy of hit this number and you'll have this muscle. And I realized that a few months later. So this is like mid to late 2019. I stick with it through the end of 2019. I stick with it into the early 2020. We all know what happened in March of 2020. I don't even know if I can say that word on the channel or this video will get taken down or whatever. I'm sure it's fine at this point, but basically the gyms shut down for 4 months. I was forced to use DIY gym equipment. I made a pulley cable from Home Depot and I used bricks as weights to keep in a bucket and had a couple cable attachments so I could do like tricep push downs and like one arm lat pull downs and whatnot. And this is where I had to actually experiment. So I had enough equipment to kind of maintain my muscle, not really enough to build it, not enough weight to build very much, but I did have enough to build my arms a little bit. So I started to realize, and I kind of broke myself out of that echo chamber that powerlifting is, and started to think a little bit more critically and reflect a little bit more on my training. At that point, I had built my forearms up a little bit. I had built my arms up a little bit and said, okay, well, let's see. The gains that I made that were the best was when I was just doing hypertrophy work. And yes, I was slowly applying the right fundamentals. I was getting stronger over time and increasing my volume over time on hypertrophy lifts and getting stronger at them, but I wasn't sacrificing my fundamentals just to improve my strength numbers on 3 specific lifts that aren't the best for hypertrophy. So I took a step back and I started to realize, like, okay, let's take a deep dive into this. Let's do some legit hindsight vision right now. My worst muscle groups were basically my chest, my triceps, and my quads. And even my upper back was pretty bad. Like my upper traps were good, my upper lats were good, but my rhomboids, mid traps, and whatnot were pretty much non-existent. And I did this reflection where I was like, okay, so the muscle groups that are trained by the big three, my quads, my chest, my triceps, my upper back, why are they not big? And this is where I started to realize that you can't just rely on one specific lift that is incomplete in its own nature to build your entire physique. That was step number 1 for me kind of breaking out of this echo chamber. Step number 2, not step number 2, but what I noticed second was, what are my best muscle groups? And I realized, and I'll throw a couple pictures up here, they were my lats, which I trained with the most volume on isolation or hypertrophy focused movements in my shoulders, which was the same exact thing, where I pumped out the most volume on isolation movements. I didn't even really overhead press much. I told you my squat, bench, deadlift numbers. My overhead press at best was 170. That is nothing compared to the other strength numbers I were hitting. So that's a terrible compound lift. Very bad strength on it, 100%. Like, yes, I know I have long arms. I do not have good genetics for pressing movements, but I was still benching 330 with a pause, and my overhead press was that weak. I realized I did a ton of side raises. I'm talking like probably 30 sets a week between side raises and face pulls, if not more than that. And my shoulders were massive. My lats were massive. And those were by far my two best muscle groups. So how did I have such a weak compound lift on overhead press in huge shoulders? And how did I have such a strong bench but non-existent triceps? And this is where it started to click, the correlation between volume and muscle size. And this is where I learned a ton. And I was like, okay, it comes down to volume, and you can't just rely on compounds. A lot of it comes down to volume on isolation lifts or more hypertrophy focused lifts, whether it's with a machine or cable. It can still be a compound, but stuff that isn't quite as fatiguing, where you can target the muscle a little bit more directly. Stuff where you can add in a better stretch, maybe a better contraction. Like, all this stuff starts to kind of add up, and I realize it's not necessarily that 1 rep max strength progression that you have to achieve. It's more the accumulation of actual high quality volume that leads to muscular growth. With that being said, you obviously need the fundamentals that I realized at some point last year, but this is where things started to change. And to backtrack a little bit, after the gym shutdown, I basically trained throughout the entire shutdown in more of like a calisthenics or very light dumbbell, very light cable hypertrophy movements. And then I took about 6 months off of lifting. I had a couple changes in my life that kind of led me to put training on the back burner, which will never happen again. I completely recognized that I was losing muscle, but I'm someone that just loves training, so I knew it wouldn't last forever. It was about 5 or 6 months I took off. I lost a lot of muscle, and then I ended up, luckily for me, I ended up buying a house, which obviously led to this. So this is early 2021. So I was 22 at the time, had just bought this house, and I was like, okay, well, I'm going to build a home gym. So before I even bought a couch, I bought some weights, which as a lifter, I'm sure that's something a lot of you guys have probably done as well. But I got the house and immediately started building the home gym. And I ended up starting off with a program just to reintroduce me to lifting. I was so tired of the traditional power building type of training. I was like, there's no way I'm doing it. So what I did was I slowly built up my equipment. I ended up using a ton of rest pause sets and myo reps. Like, my workouts were super short. I'm talking like 30 minutes max, 20 or 30 minutes easily. I did every set was just rest pause. I basically did a system where I'd do as many sets as I could, let's say on a bench, would rest for like 15 seconds, do as many as I could 4 or 5 times, and that's all I would do for chest. Then I'd move on. And this style of training was fun. It was a new challenge. It was sustainable. And slowly that evolved into the program that I have now. So my home gym, started it when I was 22, right when I got the house. Just had a basic Olympic bench with a barbell up to 300 pounds, just a very standard like home gym quality bar. Still an Olympic bar. It's actually the same one I have now. And over time, I just slowly built up this entire gym and tailored it to exactly what I used to do and built my most muscle on. So I have every machine and every cable and every piece of equipment that I need to attack the muscles properly. So now this is like an incredible foundation to train exactly how I need to for hypertrophy without any extra stuff. And a lot of the stuff I have here, yes, you can find at most commercial gyms, but it's designed for what I'm training for, and it's designed for my goals. And now I have this such a better mindset that I didn't think I could really get out of, or didn't really think I could get out of that bad mindset I had before. And now I'm just like much more optimistic with my training. I actually I'm not going to sit here and say like I enjoy every workout, because that's just not true, but I do it every day. Like, I do it 6 times a week, and I love training and I love the results that I get. And it's exactly what I need to be doing to get the results that I want. So I'm going to keep the video at that today. I'm not going to go too more in depth on everything, but that's basically my entire training history summed up somewhat briefly. I'll probably talk about more specifics in the future, but yeah, thanks for watching. Let me know if you have any questions or relate to that at all.